Shalom, this is Nehemiah Gordon with Hebrew Voices coming to you today from Nashville, Tennessee. I want to share a conversation I had with Michael Del Giorno on WTN Radio 99.7 here in Nashville. That's a 100,000 watt station that reaches several states. Before I play the recording, I want to share an email I received through my website within minutes of the original broadcast. It came from a man named Matt who wrote as follows. He wrote, "Just a quick note to say I heard Nehemiah on the radio here in Middle Tennessee. I was driving down the road, flipping through the channels, and heard some DJ say information and inspiration. I held my breath. After him quoting Keith Johnson, he said something about Nehemiah. I was whooping and hollering down the road. To hear our Heavenly Father's name over the radio was quite a treat. Trust me on this, it's hard to dance and drive at the same time." Well, thanks, Matt, for sending that message. That really moved me. Okay, here's the conversation I had with Michael Del Giorno that got Matt swerving all over the Tennessee interstate.
WWTN, Hendersonville, Nashville. From the Busy Bee Heating and Air Conditioning Studio. Information fuel, opinion driven. Super Talk 99.7.
Oh, it's 10:08 on this Good Friday, April the 14th, 2017. I'm Michael, you're you. I'm so excited to have Nehemiah Gordon in studio with us. He's a Hebrew Bible scholar. He actually taught Hebrew to Reggie White.
Yeah, you know, Reggie White was known as the minister in defense. He would
just amazing guy.
Yeah, he would go do ministry in the off season. For the younger people who might not know, he won the Super Bowl, I believe it was in 1996, for the Green Bay Packers. And when he retired from football, he made it his life's goal. He said, I want to be as good a minister as I was a football player. And as he studied and started to investigate, he realized, you know what, if I really want to know what I'm talking about, I need to learn the original language. It was his goal to learn Hebrew, and I ended up being his Hebrew teacher.
Now, where were you when you did that?
So I was in Israel, and we would speak over the phone, and I went to Charlotte, North Carolina to be at his house really 4 times throughout that period, and would stay for weeks at a time, and teaching him Hebrew, and he was as intense about learning Hebrew as he was about being great at football. Now, when he came to Israel, I took him around the country, and one of his goals in life, one of the things he really wanted to do, he had learned about this thing called the Aleppo Codex. That's considered it's called the crown jewel of Hebrew manuscripts of the Bible. Mm-hmm. Every Bible today is based on the Aleppo Codex, and he wanted to go and see the original Aleppo Codex. Well, one of the things I explained to him is that what they have on display at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, at the National Museum of Israel, is a replica because it's too valuable. They're afraid someone will walk in and blow it up. So it's in a safe in this vault, in a walk-in vault. So he said, well, we got to get into to the vault. I'm like, look, Reggie, nobody gets into the vault. So I call up the director of that part of the museum, and I tell him there's this, famous football player, Reggie White, wants to come see, won the Super Bowl. He's like, no. Ariel Sharon, who was the prime minister at the time, couldn't even get to see this. We don't show it to people. It's not a game. It's too important. Well, half an hour later, I get a call from that guy's boss. Turns out one of the big donors to the museum was a football fan. And he says, if Reggie's willing to stand in front of the plaque where the guy donated.
Reggie White gets where the prime minister can't.
Exactly.
What next? The Holy of Holies?
Well, so he got in, and later Reggie said to a lot of people, and to me, he said, he had this deep voice like this. He said, that was the best day of my life. And I said to him, Reggie, what do you mean that was the best day of your life? You won the Super Bowl.
Oh, I know it.
Seeing the Hebrew manuscript was the best day of your life? He said, yeah, it was an answer to prayer. And I got to be part of that. And that was, he passed away in 2004. Too young. He was 42.
Let me tell you, there's a tsunami. There is a tsunami of...
Do you know he died the day of the tsunami? Did you?
Oh, no, I didn't know that.
He died on December 24th, 2004, I believe it was, which was the day of the tsunami. I remember I got the news. I was actually on the phone with someone. I was about to get on the phone with him, call up, and I hear from his son that he'd had a situation, a heart attack or whatever, and it was the day of the tsunami, the big tsunami.
Oh, I didn't know. What I was going to say is there's just a tsunami of influence behind him. I mean, every life he touched, he changed, he influenced, he impacted. Yeah. And whether you're Jewish or Christian, that's the kind of life we're supposed to be living. He was a great example. I didn't know you taught him Hebrew. Yeah.
Wow. And at the end of his life...
Was he a good student?
He was an amazing student. He started out not knowing the Hebrew alphabet. At the end, he could read the Torah in Hebrew. That is the 5 books. He could open up Genesis, and, he'd read it very slow, and he'd have to look up words in a dictionary. But he was able to actually read Hebrew. And I got to tell you, look, I grew up going to a Jewish day school, where we had, 5 hours every day of Jewish learning. There are Jews who go to Hebrew school who can't read the Torah as well as Reggie White could towards the end of his life. And
that's passion and determination.
It really is. Well, and look, he didn't get, part of it was raw talent, why he was such a great football player. Part of it was, I'm going to do everything I can. When no one's looking, I'm going to be running up and down hills in Tennessee. That's what he told me. He'd be running up and down hills in Tennessee to hone his skills in the off season when no one was looking, no one was watching over him. He was doing everything he could to be the best football player he could. And that's what he did with learning the Bible, learning the language of the Bible, the Hebrew language. You know, one of the things I'm really passionate about is God's holy name. And that's been an important part of my journey because God actually has a name. And, you know, it's interesting. I'll go and I'll speak to like groups of Christians and they'll be like prayer warriors, people who like literally will spend hours a day praying. And I say to them, what's God's name? And they say, well, God. His name is Lord. His name is God. Or they'll say Jesus. And look, I'm a Jew. I'm coming from the Old Testament perspective. The name of God, who Christians call the Father, appears in the Hebrew Bible 6,827 times. It appears more than all the titles, God, Lord, Almighty, all of those combined is his actual name. And in Exodus 3:15, he says, this is my name forever. This is my memorial from generation to generation. And one of my passions as a youth was to be able to call on God's actual name. Now, in Jewish tradition, we're told that it's blasphemy to speak God's name. Even though in ancient times, there's no question people spoke his name and proclaimed his name. And so this was one of my prayers, one of my passions, to be able to call on God's name. And throughout my studies, I was always trying to find out what is his name for years. And eventually I found the answer. His name is Yehovah. That's actually how it's written in the Hebrew manuscripts. And one of the things I'll be sharing on Sunday at Nazarene Trevecca University.
I was going to get the shameless plugs in,
no,
so you didn't have
shameless.
to.
I really want to share people.
No,
we only have a few minutes here, and I want to share the more information at Sunday at 5 p.m. at Nazarene Trevecca University at Tartar Student Activity Center. People can find out more at my website, nehemiahswall.com. I'm Nehemiah. I built the wall myself at nehemiahswall.com. So I'll be talking about this name, and one of the things, this is a brand new discovery I just in the last few months. I mean, I've been up until 5 in the morning many mornings. I can't go to sleep because I'm so excited about these things.
Nothing Reggie White about you either.
Oh, no, exactly. We were a perfect pair, right? Exactly. So it turns out that the rabbis knew that his name was Yehovah. And this is confirmed in manuscripts of the Bible that the scribes and the rabbis knew his name was Yehovah. The scribes hid his name in the manuscripts. Whenever they wrote his name, they left out one of the Hebrew vowels, so his name was unpronounceable. And you come to it and you say, how do we pronounce this? And they say, well, the name's hidden. It's a secret. There's this band that the rabbis have placed in the name about 1900 years ago. We come and we can't read it. And it turns out every once in a while they slipped up and they put in the full vowels. And I'll share how I discovered that. It's an amazing story. But what I found in the last few months is that the rabbis also talk about how this is a secret. And I found one particular letter written in 1608 by this rabbi named Meir of Lublin. And he writes a letter to another rabbi. And he says in the letter, he says, look, it's really difficult to put this in writing about God's name, which is Yehovah, and he gives the vowels. And he says, hide this letter in a pure and holy place, that unworthy not see it. And I'm reading this in 2017, and I'm realizing they wanted to keep this secret because of printing, though, and because of the will of God, I believe, that God wanted the secret to get out of what the ancient Jews knew his name was. And now the secret's out.
What's the power in that?
The power is that he says in number 6, he gives the priests a blessing to put upon the people. It's the priestly blessing where he says, may the Lord bless you and keep you. But in the Hebrew, it doesn't say Lord. It says 3 times, Yud He Vav He, the name Yehovah. It's actually his name. And at the end, he says, and they shall place my name upon the children of Israel, and I will bless them. So placing God's name upon people, placing the actual name Yehovah, that is the power of the blessing. And, you know, this Sunday for Christians, I'm a Jew, but for Christians, this Sunday is Easter Sunday. And I don't know if you know this, but you know the first words that Jesus spoke after the resurrection according to the New Testament? Do you remember what those words were? So in the English, it says, all hail. And you're thinking like, what is he, a Roman? All hail Caesar, right? In some translations, it says greetings, which is in the Greek word chairete, which means something like blessings upon you, greetings. There's a Hebrew version of the Gospel of Matthew that I came across. I didn't discover it. This professor in Georgia discovered it in the 80s. But in this Hebrew version of the Gospel of Matthew, the first 2 words Jesus speaks after, as he was known, Yeshua back then, he speaks after the resurrection, are the words Yehovah Yoshia. Yehovah will save you. He actually speaks according to the Gospels. First word out of his mouth is the name of his Father, Yehovah, and then he says he will save you. And here's the really cool thing, Michael, that those words, Yehovah Yoshia, are actually the meaning of the name Jesus in Hebrew. Did you know that?
No.
The name Jesus, Yeshua in Hebrew.
Yeshua HaMashiach, right.
Exactly. So Yeshua is actually an abbreviated form of Yehoshua, of Joshua.
By the way, this fascinating stuff, because I wanted to make it clear to everybody, the Hebrew Yeshua versus Greek Jesus.
That's one of the books I've written.
It was actually a paper you wrote that eventually got encouraged into being a book.
Exactly.
And I encourage people to get it. And that book and this story gets me to the exegete of why I wanted you here.
Yeah.
I love what you said to one person. I think it was a Christian who did this to you and said, what are you doing in my church? Kind of a thing. And you said, well, I was invited. Why are you here?
Why are you here?
Who forced you? And I find myself a lot in that situation. You know, listen, I'm on the radio. If you don't like what you hear,
turn it off.
There's other stations. But I really think the making of the messenger is as important as the message. And you just sought out following in a line of rabbis in your family, but with a curiosity and a thirst and a yearning for God's face, not what's in his hands, and an understanding and a truth directly from him. And God had very unique plans for you. And that plan really boils down to this, that you find yourself, and if I'd have tapped you on the shoulder 25 years ago, you'd have looked at me like I was nuts, but you find yourself in Christian churches now, kind of as you did asked to do with Reggie White, to help us understand what we're missing in not understanding the Old Covenant and the original language. And I'm sure you're being exposed to some things that you weren't exposed to growing up. And that book, and that paper in that book of Matthew was really a change. And
it really was
challenge
a
for
turning
you.
point in a way. I mean, if you would have told me 20 years ago, you're going to actually be in relationship with a Christian pastor studying the Gospel of Matthew in Hebrew or any other language, I would have said, you're crazy. I want nothing to do with Christians. We have this long history of Jews suffering at the hands of Christians. And look, after I wrote a book about the Lord's Prayer in Hebrew called The Prayer to Our Father, and it was co-written with a Christian pastor, and I gave it to my father, who was a rabbi of blessed memory, and asked him to read it. And I said, okay, Dad, what did you think of it? And he said, look, why are you doing this interfaith dialogue? He said, look, we've got our thing, they've got their thing. We're happy. Let them be happy, and they don't talk to them. We don't want to interact with them.
What are you missing not interacting with us? And then I'm going to ask you the more obvious question. What are we missing not interacting with you?
So here's what I learned from my friend, Pastor Keith Johnson, who is a Methodist pastor. He's an African-American gentleman. He's actually the man who introduced me to Reggie White. He was Reggie White's. Had a ministry in which Reggie White was involved, and he introduced me to him. And he said something really profound that at first I didn't discern, and then over the years I've seen this. He said, Nehemiah, where we're coming from, we have inspiration, and where you're coming from, Nehemiah, you have information. And I was totally comfortable with that.
That's a powerful way to say it.
We don't deal with inspiration in the Jewish tradition. We don't terms like Holy Spirit and stuff like that. No. That's for simple people who aren't able to read these books. That's this elitist attitude that I grew up with. But as I was walking with him in faith and interacting with people like him, I would see, you know what, there is this inspiration. And he said something really profound. He said, when you combine the inspiration and the information, you get revelation. And I found that to be true. I found that when I embrace the inspiration and I combine it with this information, I'll tell you a story. So Keith Johnson and I were in South Africa, and Keith is an African-American gentleman. We were going and speaking. We spoke in 12th place in South Africa. Most of the places we spoke, quite frankly, were middle-class white establishments. He said, I want to get in with the people, meaning with his people. He wanted to go to one of these townships, and I was terrified. We go to this township, 400,000 people living in shacks. One person says, you go in there and they kill you. And they said that to him, not just me.
Right.
And I'm like, I don't think we should go here, Keith. He drags me there. We meet this man, and he starts telling us and he's a Christian pastor who lives in the back of a church with his children. And he starts telling us this story, and he tells us, he said, 7 years ago, I had a dream. And in that dream, I saw 4 Hebrew words. And he starts telling us this when he hears that I'm from Israel. He says, can you read Hebrew? I'm like, of course I can read Hebrew. I'm not illiterate. I live in Israel. And he says, 7 years ago I had a dream, and in that dream I saw 4 Hebrew letters. And you hear in English a 4-letter word, you think a bad word.
Right, yeah.
In Hebrew, you hear a 4-letter word. The first
word.
thing you think is God's name, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, Yehovah. We actually call that the Tetragrammaton, the 4-letter word, right? So I write down on a piece of paper, I say, these are the words you saw. He looks and he's like, I'm not so sure, because I have really sloppy penmanship. Keith shows him the cover of a book he wrote called His Hallowed Name Revealed, again, amazing book. And he says, those are the 4 letters I saw. And here's the crazy thing. So he saw God's name, Yehovah, in a dream. And he waited 7 years for a Jew to walk into his church in a township of 400,000 poor people, place where Jews and Hebrew speakers never walk in.
I don't want to bust his bubble, but he could have gone to, Nehemiah'sWall.com and got that answer.
Well, but he doesn't have internet. This guy had not even a smartphone, a dumb phone. You have to understand, this is a guy who, like, somebody donated the bricks to his church, another person donated the mortar. These are people
What did that confirm to your heart?
So what that told me is God can speak to a pastor in a township in South Africa, which is outside the paradigm I was taught. I was taught God doesn't speak to Christians. He doesn't speak to pastor. He only speaks to rabbis who are meditating and studying the Talmud, or from my perspective, studying the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible. And I found out God's bigger than the boxes that we've created for him. God can speak to a pastor in a poor township in South Africa. And look, I go back and I look at the Bible and I say, you know what? We should have known this all along. He's speaking to the woman in the desert. He's speaking to Hagar, the Egyptian handmaiden, and he hears her prayer. Why can't he speak to and give a dream? But here's the amazing part about this dream that the guy received in Khayelitsha in the township in South Africa. He never had any hope of interpreting that dream by himself. He didn't know Hebrew. I didn't have the dream. But God knew that I would walk one day into that church dragged by my Methodist pastor friend, Keith Johnson, and he knew
Keith's formula, his quote, should be on every one of our...
Inspiration, the pastor had the inspiration, I had the information, and we put them together, and there was revelation. And God knew we would have to come together to get that message, and that's so exciting.
And that story is really the journey of how God has used you.
And I am so excited about I'm going to be sharing about this on Sunday at 5 p.m. at Nazarene Trek University at the Tartar Student Activity Center. People can find out about it on my website, Nehemiahswall.com.
All right, so bottom line is, what's a Jew from a rabbi, Hebrew scholar, doing at a Nazarene University Sunday on Easter? That is the story of your life.
Well, I'll be sharing about the first 2 words that Jesus spoke according to the Gospels after the resurrection. What an appropriate time to be talking about that. His first 2 words were, first of all, the meaning of his name. His name means Yehovah will save, Yehovah Yoshia, and that's the name of his father, Yehovah, name of all of our father, Yehovah, the creator of the universe. He spoke those words, and what is the significance of that name? I mean, it's amazing. What that name means is
name
so
above
powerful.
all names, and we should know it.
Absolutely.
Nehemiah Gordon, I like to say it right. I would encourage you to go to his website, see his books. I think there's a lot that believers of Christianity can learn with the information from this particular scholar. And my last question I was dying to ask you in person, and I know you didn't discover it, but your work on the Hebrew Yeshua versus the Greek Jesus.
Yes, sir.
What do you do now with Jesus?
Well, I've come to if you would have asked me 20 years ago, I would have said Jesus was this evil man who came and caused trouble for the Jews. And now I see he was actually a righteous teacher who taught people in his day, the Jews, to follow the Torah, the Word of God.
But as somebody that studies every word in the original language of the Old Covenant, you're seeing in this Matthew your first glimpse.
Yeah.
I'm not going to get with like the Bible scholars and argue, did Matthew write in Greek first, then it was Hebrew, or whatever. But you saw a lot of fulfillment that you were never exposed to.
I would
Consistencies.
I would put it differently. I would say I believe him. If he said, I came not to change one jot or one tittle, not to do away with the law or the prophets, I take him at face value. I believe that was his mission and what he intended to do. And I find he was an amazing teacher who taught some wonderful, beautiful things.
A lot of people feel that way about you. And they'll see why at Trevecca University, 5 o'clock on Sunday, Easter Sunday, at the Student Activity Center. Again, get more information at nehemiahswall.com. Peace. Shalom.
Shalom.
You have been listening to Hebrew Voices with Nehemiah Gordon. Thank you for supporting Nehemiah's McCore Hebrew Foundation. Learn more at nehemiahswall.com.